Welcome back to another episode of Health Matters with PA Lynn Szabo. I'm Heather Poland, and what are we going to talk about today, Lynn?
Well, since Halloween's coming up, I thought I'd talk about the nightmare of head lice.
Ew.
Yeah, and it's going around the community right now, which is, there's a lot of angst on Facebook about mostly mothers, who have to deal with it and are like over it, way over it. And can I start by saying that parents, and especially moms, see head lice as a stain on their mothering souls? And I really advocate for that to stop.
Yeah,
and
we need to stop mom shaming for every little thing.
Absolutely. And, you know, I'm a mom. My kids are in their early 30s right now, but I remember going through this in our household, and we had a particularly difficult time convincing an uneducated nursery school teacher that my daughter's lice were treated and she could go back. So I just got thoroughly shamed about it. Nobody said a word to the kid's dad, which...
Why do we as a society mom shame all the time? Maybe that's a topic
I think moms are an easy target because, you know, we're trying so hard to do the right thing. And if somebody points out something negative, it's like our souls crumple. And I think we should stand up and say, hey, head lice is like being a kid. And, you know, there's ways to deal with it, and we should just move forward and cut the shaming for both the mother and the child.
Absolutely.
So having a kid with head lice does not mean you are a bad parent, most especially a bad mom. And having other kids at school with head lice does not mean that their parents are failing. Having head lice in a kid is just like something they go through. It's just going to happen, and you're going to have to kind of, in my opinion, go at it with some medical knowledge and some persistence. But that's easier for some families to do because it is actually kind of expensive to go through than it is, say, a family who doesn't have the resources to do it.
Oh, gotcha.
And let's just remember the shame that head lice provokes hurts kids too.
Yeah.
My daughter at 4 years old was like thoroughly shamed. And even though what she had in her hair was sock fuzz and, other miscellaneous forms of stuff that just floats around the house, the woman who thought she knew what she was talking about really, really did damage to my daughter, and I should never have allowed it. I should have brought her down pretty quickly. Head lice are just creepy, okay? They are not dangerous for the most part.
What do you mean for the most part?
Well, the only child I ever knew that got hurt by head lice was actually an unhoused child living on the Spit in Humboldt County. And her mother, because they didn't have any money to do all the things that you're supposed to do, was treating her with kerosene.
Oh, my God.
And her hair lit on fire because their heat was an open flame.
So it wasn't the lice, it was the home remedy. It wasn't
the lice, it was the desperation that brought her mother to that.
Wow.
This was a long time ago, and probably not very many people remember it, but it was shocking to the community.
I bet.
However, rationally treated, science-based treatment for head lice is mostly expensive and inconvenience and just kind of gross. There is little mortality or morbidity, and what that means is it doesn't really hurt the kids. And it's just the freak out that's going around it. Yeah, and the freak out is also on the teacher's part because, they personally don't want to get them. Adults rarely get them because adults don't roll around like puppies, for the most part. And, it's just typical kid behavior to be all over each other. And that's actually what causes the transmission head lice. They don't jump. They do hang around on clothes, but not as long as people think.
So that whole theory of you're hanging your coats up next to each other and one kid's got lice and everybody's going to get it, that's not necessarily true?
No, not to the extent that people are paranoid about it. They don't jump, and they're obligate parasites that have to feed on human blood. So they don't jump around from the cat or the dog. And, they just go from human to human when heads are in close contact. And, that's younger kids. They're
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. So there's two groups of treatment. One is a pediculicide, which is, something that kills lice. They usually kill it with a neurotoxic form of action. So it's a pesticide, right? And it's kind of gross to think you're putting that on your little baby's head.
That's true.
Yeah, we're called upon to feed our kids organically. We're called upon to make sure our home is safe of things like radon gas and cigarette smoke. To put pesticides on a little 3-year-old's head is like more than most moms can handle. Oftentimes they're relying on stuff that's over the counter and expensive, and probably something that lice, at least in this community, are resistant to. So, the little buggers are able to become resistant to these kind of pesticides fairly quickly. So not only is it hard for people to deal with it because they have to go out and buy a bunch of stuff, and then they have to, go against every good form of mom sense and put what are neurotoxic chemicals on their kid's head. But then they might have a resistance problem, so they need to be treated again and again and again. There's another kind of group of treatment, which is kind of obvious, but I hadn't thought of it this way, is physical forms of treatment, and that's picking nits.
Like with the little comb that comes in the thing.
Yeah, with the little comb, wet combing hair, and picking nits, and then also doing laundry. Again, if somebody doesn't have a washing machine and a dryer that is working really well, that means they got to schlep everything all one time down to the laundromat, and which
it's expensive.
Yeah, it's expensive. And but I'll give you a provider tip here. If you got something that's basically clean, like a down comforter, and you don't necessarily want to wash that, you can just put it in the dryer at high heat for a prolonged period of time.
How long's a prolonged period?
So prolonged period on my dryer, because weirdly my yuppie dryer had like a biologic cycle, which I thought was kind of delicate.
I've never seen that.
It's high heat for 90 minutes.
Okay.
And that might save some money. And if it's not something that you particularly want to wash, then you could go ahead and just do the dryer. And that, in my experience with head lice in our family, it was the hot, prolonged dryer cycle that saved us.
If that works, so my mom's theory growing up, right, because I've said this before, I was one of 8 kids, and we've always had really long hair, my sisters and I. When there was lice going around in the elementary school, she made sure she washed our hair.
Right.
And then for my sisters and I, we would get it blow dried. Like she would blow dry our hair really, really, really well. And I remember it being hot but not burn. Right. Is it the same kind of basic principle as you're trying to killing it out with heat?
That was actually very smart of your mom.
Yeah.
So that was another example of kind of a physical way of getting rid of lice, is washing your hair. And then also make sure it was thoroughly dried. And I imagine she combed it out with the fine tooth comb, was probably part of it. I also put as an aside, another provider tip, I read that living nits will bioluminesce. And so I got a woods lamp, which is just a black light.
Uh-huh.
And I looked through my kids' hair with the black light. And now some things like sock fuzz also kind of become neon, but I was able to find the nits that were alive really quickly doing that.
So that does work.
I thought it did, and I could recommend it, but none of my research today really supported it, and nobody ever mentioned it.
Data-free zone?
Yeah, a data-free zone, but anecdotally it was certainly helpful. Also, physical forms of treatment do not encourage resistance, and they're non-toxic, but they take time. It takes forever to comb out a wiggly kid's head.
It does.
Luckily, my girls had really thin hair, and although it was kind of on the long side, it wasn't like Some girls have it down to their waist and stuff.
Yeah.
So you're mostly looking at the scalp, and you're mostly looking behind the ears and at the nape of the neck.
Okay.
So, but in our house, we got days away from the point where I was going to shave one of their heads, and I felt like it wasn't fair to shave her head and not shave my head. So I was getting out there in the mothering hysteria land.
Wow.
To placate a teacher who didn't really understand medicine very well.
Wow.
So, of note, no-knit policies for schools are not effective. And this is some
Wait,
of
what's a no-knit policy at
a
school?
no-knit policy is that a kid can't go back to school unless they have no knits observed.
Okay.
Because people, under most circumstances, can't really tell the difference between living knits and dead knits. There's all kinds of like little anecdotal things like the UV light, but also the distance of the knit away from the scalp. Ones that are closer to the scalp are more likely to be living, and ones that are a couple inches away, more than a half an inch, are likely to be dead.
Okay.
But teachers don't want to get head lice themselves, and they don't want to brought home to their kids. So there's a lot of insistence on no knits. Now, my 30-year-old was the one that had the problem with the preschool teacher, and it's one of the reasons I actually ran for the school board at that school. It was a charter school in Humboldt County, because I wanted to rewrite their lice policy. And so
did you?
Yeah, I did. I rewrote a lice policy that was consistent with the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I got rid of the no knits thing.
Wow.
Because it was hurting my daughter emotionally, and there was no scientific reason for it to be happening. So
Good for you.
pissed off mom, Mama Bear went for it.
So how long were you on the school board?
20 years. 2 different schools.
Wow.
I stayed as a community member for a long time because I got to go on all these cool field trips as a medical chaperone. The school that they went to when they were older was known for international travel. So I see a lot of complaining on Facebook about moms who are saying, I did my part, and they accepted this kid into school who had an active case of lice. That's not true. No knits. Some knits are not necessarily viable, and they're not going to transmit the disease to your kid. There's always, like I said, ways to check if knits are living or dead.
The knits are the little white eggs, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's not the active bug crawling around. It's
No.
the eggs.
I see very few of the active bugs, and they're just gross when you see them. They totally freak me out. But the knits look like not even grains of rice, but little white dots.
Yeah.
And some of them are translucent, and they're stuck to the hair shaft, so you have to kind of pinch them between your fingernails and run them along the whole length of the shaft to get them off. They're adhesed on, I guess is a better way of saying that.
Okay.
So infestations are common in kids ages 3 to 12, and they're way more common in girls than boys, probably because most girls have longer hair than boys. And, it's easier to treat boys who just shave their head and tell them they have a cool hairdo like their dad or something. But girls, you can't do that with them. They're not interested in shaving their head for the most part.
No. I would think that's worse than having lice, to be honest with you. I would have been devastated as a little girl to have my head shaved.
Right.
The humiliation alone.
Think about it in Nazi Germany, in the concentration camps. That's why when you're watching movies about or documentaries about the time, that's why the inmates...
They shaved them.
They shaved them.
Okay.
And it's humiliating, especially for a woman. They absolutely need head-to-head contact, and they cannot jump. So, the majority of the transmission is because some little girl's leaning over her homework, and her friend, who's also her homework teammate, is leaning over, and their heads are touching. and that's how they go from one to one. It's not hard to encourage your child to not have that kind of head-to-head contact. It's not hard to change where you hang up the jackets. So the jackets are hung maybe on the edge of the chairs and not on little hooks by the door.
Okay.
None of this is hard to do.
I think it'd be hard the head-to-head contact, right? Because you're hugging your little friends when you see them, and to be like, don't touch your friends, you're going to get bugs. I mean,
Yeah, well, I think it has to be more sensitive conversation than that.
I would just imagine, but yeah,
Yeah.
I wouldn't know how to broach that, to be honest with you, with a child and an
It
appropriate
depends
manner.
their age, but I think my 4-year-old was ready to hear that.
Okay.
She was so desperate to get rid of an imaginary case of head lice that she would have done anything.
Poor baby. I'm sorry you guys went
Yeah.
through that.
Yeah. So they do need head-to-head contact, and they do sometimes spread from contact with infected clothing, but really it doesn't happen as often as people think. And I'm thinking, here we are doing all this laundry because we're certain the pillowcases are the problem, and they're not really the problem.
Gary Luker.
Hang on. So let's see. Look for eggs close to the hairline. Those are the ones that are usually viable. And look behind ears and at the nape of the neck. And don't get excited if you're seeing stuff that looks like dandruff or sock lint. You can't assume every little white piece of stuff in somebody's hair is a head lice thing.
I think we have such an innate fear of lice that's what we think. Dandruff or anything else is like, oh my gosh, it's lice.
I know. At least put it under like a magnifying glass if you're at all confused about it, and don't label the kid.
Okay.
Don't do head lice checks in front of other kids. There should be a way to maybe subtly take a kid in the bathroom or down to the nurse's office and just don't make a big deal about it.
I remember in the 80s you had to line up once a month, and they had those wooden things, and they would check everybody in the school had to line up and go and get their lice check done, and then you could just see the kids that were pulled out of line and went to the office, and it was like, oh, that one's got lice.
Yeah,
It was the weirdest thing, but we did it for years.
I think we should give the kids more dignity than that. So treatments. So when talking about chemical treatments, there's a couple of them. There's permethrin. They're hard to say. There's also RID, which is pyrethrum. Ivermectin topical. Remember, ivermectin is anti-parasitic and not an antiviral.
Good distinction. And
my favorite was Ovide, which is actually malathion, but it's really, 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 really dilute, So malathion is a familiar name to me from, pesticides that are used agriculturally. And I was like horrified to be putting it on my daughter's head. And then she went and got some in her mouth.
Oh,
and then
no.
I had to call poison control. And the guy just laughs and he said, she'll probably get more eating an unwashed apple than she got from this exposure. So calm down there, Mom. When I was doing urgent care in this town, we actually saw a lot of people in oftentimes big families with 8 to 10 people, and we would just treat everybody presumptively. But Ovide came to town, which is malathion, and when it was brand new, it was like something finally worked.
what is that, like a brand? Is that the ingredient, or is that the brand?
Ovide is the brand name, and malathion is the generic name.
I've never heard of those.
Yeah. And it wasn't used very much because it wasn't covered by Medi-Cal. But as soon as we were able to get some people treated with it, it was like a problem that was endemic in this town went away.
Okay.
So I'm pretty down with using it, although, again, it's not paid for. It's expensive, and it's kind of hard to get. Most of the pharmacists just want you to get the over-the-counter RID, which is paid for by partnership. However, there's pharmacies in town who will say, your provider never called it in. Not true. Go buy it over the counter so, I don't have to fill it here.
Okay.
And, so, you might ask your provider if you're not having any luck with RID, what some other choices would be, and ask to get a prior authorization. It's not too hard to do. It's just a little bit of paperwork.
Okay.
So each of these have to have their pluses and minuses. And the really important thing is this is where literacy is super important. You have to apply these to with correct instructions, and there's a correct method, and you have to use them carefully. Some of them, especially malathion, is also flammable, so you don't want to you want to know that ahead of time.
But is it still, does it leave a residue where your kid's flammable after it's all washed out?
No, after it's washed out, it should be good, but it stays in for 8 hours. So cleaning of fomites is recommended. Fomite is an inanimate object that could be carrying the parasite. That's like cleaning your sheets and stuff. I personally had more luck with long hot dryers, and I put the pillows in and washed the pillows and then put them in a long hot dryer, the actual pillows.
Okay.
And that helped, although my daughter's case of head lice was largely imaginary. Carpets only need to be vacuumed. You don't have to go buy special chemicals to put in your carpets. Remember, that's somebody selling something. That's not necessarily something that's going to help you.
Okay, so we were always told when you were done vacuuming, if you had head lice in your house, vacuum every room, and then replace the vacuum cleaner bag.
Right.
So that you took all of whatever was. It's the same thing for like a flea infestation.
Same thing,
you have to take that bag out and outside and throw it away.
Right. That's more with fleas.
Okay.
Remember, head lice are obligate parasites, so they mostly hang out where they can eat.
Okay.
Okay. So prevention, like what your mom did, check your kids weekly, and this is accomplished by wet combing. So you get the kids' hair wet, and you get the fine comb, and you go through, section by section, paying more attention to what's behind the ears and what's at the nape of the neck. And, as the mom assigned to do that, it was tedious. That's why they called, they're really, if you say, look, they're picking nits, It's a tedious, takes a long time, long process, and nobody really wants to sit down and do it. Nits alone are not an evidence of reinfection, so that's why the no-net policy in school. I personally used an herbal ointment that I bought in Arcata at the herb store, but it could be replicated, I think, easily with olive oil and lavender oil. And so for a while, my child's hair smelled like lavender, and I didn't go into detail with anybody. I said, look, we just have this new shampoo. I thought lavender might smell nice. So it can be really subtle, and nobody really has to, go in that shaming area again.
So you didn't douse her head with olive oil and lavender oil. I
did overnight, and then I washed it all out in the morning.
Okay.
And there was enough residue. She never got it again, but most of the time she didn't really even have it.
So lavender, because I've heard tea tree oil, but you're saying lavender worked for you?
I don't like tea tree oil. I'm not a believer in tea tree oil because every once in a while there's like a bad batch of tea tree oil that comes through the community, and people have really strong contact dermatitis, or they have an inflammation of the skin because of the tea tree oil, and I'm not sure if it's something they put in it or if it's just highly constant. There's a batch that's more
constant. Is that because they didn't use a carrier oil like the olive oil or a coconut oil, and they just applied it directly to their skin?
Right. Tea tree oil, I think, is too harsh for kids' skin.
Yeah.
So I don't really do it. But I'm not sure if that was really helpful to her, but it did end the problem we had at home, and also a new school was really helpful to her. But still, as an adult, she remembers being checked in front of all the students and every day sent home. And I had to continue to pay for her care at the preschool, even though she was at home with her dad.
Wow.
So don't do that to kids. That's a horrible thing.
Yeah, that's a lifelong horrible thing.
Yeah. So shaming doesn't work. This is a public health issue, and no child or family should ever be shamed about this. So the other thing I wanted to say in this last couple of minutes is I saw my first case of trench foot yesterday, and
Wait, explain what trench foot is.
trench foot is kind of it's mostly in people who are out in the elements a lot, so the unhoused population, but also was a big problem during, like World War II. That's where it got its name, from the soldiers who were in the trench. And it's kind of a hypersaturated skin on the feet. So the soles of the feet become hypersaturated with water because they can't be kept dry. And we live in a temperate rainforest, so our unhoused population has a really hard time being in dry, waterproof shoes and dry socks. And this is not something that should be happening. It would be nice if they all had dry, warm places to be at night out of the storms, but that's a little bit harder to do than making sure they get good foot care. So if you are coming up on the holidays and you want to express charity to those among us who are not as lucky as you, getting dry socks to Mission Possible or patient services would be kind of an unsung hero kind of thing to do. It's super important that these people stay in dry socks. That most of them have no way of doing that. And so they're like serial sock users. So they need a lot of socks over the winter.
Now, what kind of socks are we talking about? Just any old socks? All cotton socks? Moisture wicking socks? What kind of socks are we talking about?
Moisture wicking is important. Wool might be more important than cotton, but just the ability to if their feet get saturated, to have clean new socks is important.
Is that going to be effective with, if their shoes are soaked through and they have clean, dry socks, when they put them on, aren't their socks just going to get all wet again?
Right. The problem is they need
waterproof
socks
shoes
mostly, and they need waterproof shoes.
Okay.
So yeah, your point is well taken.
So once you saw this trench foot on this, what's the treatment? Just keep their feet dry?
The initial treatment for the not as advanced type that this patient had is good foot hygiene. So
Okay.
dry socks. Excuse me.
So
Dry socks and waterproof shoes.
dry socks and dry waterproof shoes. So shy of that, if this person can't get those things, what happens? I mean, is it just they have oversaturated feet?
Yeah, and it can be bad enough to go on to secondary bacterial or fungal infections, and then in worst case scenarios, amputation.
Okay, so that's what I remember was from those Vietnam movies and the World War II movies, was the sergeant yelling at them to change their dang socks, and
Right.
So they didn't have that happen because it took them out of service. So is it painful to have?
Yeah,
So it's difficult for them to walk and.
and it contributes to frostbite.
Oh, so when we get colder, this is beginning. Dang.
So what the ultimate answer, of course, is to have people housed
Have people
and
housed.
out of the weather. But we got to start somewhere. Let's collect dry socks for the least among us in our community.
Gotcha.
So
Dry socks it is.
yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for bringing that to our attention. I appreciate it, Lynn. So this has been another episode of Health Matters. If you would like to listen to this episode again, or any of the other episodes that Lynn has done over the past 7 years, is it 7 years or 8 years now?
7 years.
7 years. You can go to KFUG's YouTube channel and select the playlist, and they're all right there. Thanks, Lynn. I'll see you next week.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.